I feel like they are the only nation with the capability and the intent to sort of rewrite the rules-based international order to an order which will suit them better.
You're listening to the USSC Briefing Room, a podcast from the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney, where we give you a seat at the table for a USSC briefing on the latest developments in US news and foreign policy. We'll cover what you need to know and what's beneath the surface of the news.
Hello, I'm Tom Corbin, a research fellow in the Foreign Policy and Defense program here at the United States Study Center. Thanks a lot for joining us on the USSC Briefing Room today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're recording on today. The University of Sydney is located on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present, and future. And it's safe to say we've seen a lot of changes at the Pentagon this year. President Donald Trump has reverted to calling the Department of Defense the Department of War. There appears to be at least an operational reprioritization of defense in the Western Hemisphere. And the Pentagon has also introduced controversial new policies around news media and public engagement, where, among other things, reporters have been asked to sign a pledge to refrain from reporting information not authorized for release by the Pentagon. And defense officials have largely been barred from engaging with non-government counterparts, including in my world, the think tank space. Some of the biggest changes have also been in terms of personnel. In February, the administration announced a number of changes at the top of the US military leadership, including removing the likes of Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff C.Q. Brown, the Air Force Vice Chief of Staff, and Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti. And it's Admiral Lisa Franchetti who I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast today. Lisa, thank you so much for being on here.
Thanks, Tom. It's really a pleasure to be here with you.
Admiral Franchetti's career is a distinguished one, spanning 40 years, nearly half of which was spent at sea. She was the first woman to serve on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the first woman to serve as Chief of Naval Operations, and only the second woman to ever be promoted to the rank of 4-star Admiral in the US Navy. What's changed in the global security environment from the Cold War to now? What did the changes over the past year indicate about the future direction of the US military? And what will be the biggest challenge facing the US military over the next 40 years? These are some of the questions that we're looking ahead to today. Now, Lisa, just to remind you, at the episode, I will get you to give us your by-the-numbers statistic. Are you ready on that front?
I'm ready on that front.
Excellent. So to get us started, maybe, could you please start by telling us a bit about what led you to join the Navy in the first place and why you stuck with it?
Yeah, well, it may surprise you to know that I'd really never planned to make the Navy a career. In fact, I didn't really even know anything about the Navy when I went to college. But I was walking along the street during freshman orientation week, and I came across a couple of people throwing a football and having a cookout. And I stopped and asked them what they did. And they said, oh, we're ROTC students. We're going to join the Navy and Marine Corps. And if you're interested, we might be able to get you $100 a month, free textbooks, and a chance to compete for a scholarship. So I said, wow, tell me more. Scholarship sounded pretty good. And I went in and talked with their lieutenant. He told me a lot of great sea stories about the Navy. And I said, sign me up. So that's how I started. And I did receive a full scholarship the following year. But that's not why I stayed in the Navy. I really stayed in the Navy because I thoroughly enjoyed it. I might have joined for free college and a chance to see the world, but I stayed for the mission, for the people, for the great teams I got to be part of, and a chance to serve something greater than myself. Amazing.
It's funny how those chance encounters can often be so life-defining in hindsight, in particular, when you look back over all those years. As I mentioned in the introduction, you were the first woman to serve as Chief of Naval Operations, but you were also the first woman to sit on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What did those milestones mean to you personally, but also professionally?
Well, I think of my career, my 40-year career, as really a front row seat to history. When I joined the Navy back in 1985, there were a lot of limitations on what women could do. We couldn't serve on combatant ships. We couldn't fly combatant aircraft. And in fact, only 17 women a year got to go to sea when I first joined the Navy. 17. A very small number. And I wasn't selected to be one of them, actually. So it all changed, though, in 1993. I was fortunate enough to have a great mentor who really encouraged me to work hard and find a way to go to sea. So I got to do that in 1987 and got to serve on 2 ships, 2 deployments. And then I was in department head school, kind of making the next step to being able to go on in the Navy. And the combat exclusion law was repealed. So in 1993, Congress decided to take away the part of the law that prevented women from serving on combatant ships and flying in combatant aircraft. So I was really lucky at the time. I was in that department at school. I was still a very young officer, and they were only letting people at that level make the jump. And I was allowed to switch to destroyers. And then the rest is a little bit history. I got to command a destroyer squadron, a carrier strike group, and a fleet, and gained really all the same experiences as my male counterparts along the way. So I think if you look at it, to your original question, from a professional perspective, it was really just the evolution of the natural progression of women from the time of the change of the combat exclusion law in 1993. You know, you think about how long it takes to grow a CNO, and that's about how long it takes to grow a CNO. So it really was just a natural statement on the progress that women had made in the Navy, where we really were considered nothing different.
Yeah.
I think personally, you know, it was an incredible honor to have the chance to lead our Navy, really the honor of a lifetime. We have amazing sailors, civilians, families, and I was so excited to have the opportunity to really continue to make our Navy ready to answer the call, whether it was in peace, in crisis, or in war, and take care of those people that really make the difference.
You spent all of your career as a surface warfare officer. I mean, given that we're in the context of AUKUS here, did a life as a submariner ever interest you?
So when the policy and the law changed back in 93, it did not include submarines. That didn't come along until much later. And personally, I enjoy seeing the sunrise and the sunset every day, so I'm not sure I would have been a very good submariner. I did finally get underway on a submarine when I was a 3-star, serving as the commander of the US 6th Fleet in Naples. And although I enjoyed being there, I also got to serve on them in ice camp and go under the ice in a submarine. Both of those experiences confirmed that I really like to be able to step out and get some fresh air every once in a while.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with that. Maybe let's zoom out a little bit here as we start our discussion about the global security environment. What was the global security environment like at the time that you started? And this is a big question, but how do you think it's changed?
Yeah, you know, as I reflect on that question, I think life was a lot more simple in 1985. We were in the Cold War. We had one adversary, you know, that was the Soviet Union. And I remember being underway on a destroyer at the time, getting some of my qualifications done and hunting for Soviet submarines. And that was all we really thought about. All of our training, our testing, everything was focused on the one adversary. And in that sense, things were remarkably simple back then. I remember standing on the bridge of my ship, the USS Shenandoah, while I was deployed in 1989. We were in the Mediterranean. And the way you got news back then was just a little ticker of news that would come and trickle in, and it was printed out on a sheet of paper, and you got to read the news every morning. And there it said the Berlin Wall had fallen. And I remember looking out over the horizon thinking, wow, I wonder what this means for the future. And, you know, standing back there all that time ago, it's hard to imagine all the changes that have happened, right? The collapse of the Soviet Union, we had the peace dividend, we had partnership for peace exercises with our old former adversaries at the time. And then as you move on, you know, the rise in terrorism, you know, different wars in the Middle East, the non-transparent growth of the Chinese military. And, you know, continuing into today, you think about the growth of NATO, the strengthening of alliances and new alliances all around the world, especially here in the Pacific. But then you think about kind of the other axis of relationships that's forming between Russia and China and Iran and North Korea. You think about Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the war in Gaza, many wars in Africa, a lot of democratic backsliding. And it's not so simple anymore. And so folks working in the national security space right now, they're dealing with a lot more complexity, without a doubt. I think on the military side of it, you know, when you think about it, again, this is totally different from when I was operating back then, and really kind of discrete domains. And now you see this big joint and coalition warfighting ecosystem where we all need to work together. We need to have interoperable systems. And now you see this changing character of war with robotic and autonomous systems and new domains like space and cyber, and the advent of AI, which has the promise of really speeding decision-making. So a much different environment and much more complex.
Yeah, for sure. Kind of a across the spectrum wholesale change. We might come back to the unmanned and AI question in a little while. But I might ask you to paint a little bit of a vignette of kind of the operational experience of how the global security environment was changing. I know you were serving at the time of the 2018 strikes on Syria ordered by then President Donald Trump, now President Donald Trump. What did you learn from leading in kind of a crisis situation such as that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that you can learn from any crisis situation, and you really don't know what kind of leader you are, until you're tested in a situation like that. So just a little bit of the backstory on that was Bashar al-Assad had used chemical weapons on his own people, and the intention was to eliminate the chemical weapons manufacturing capability. That's sort of the backdrop. I probably would just specifically talk about three things that I learned from that. First is that you really always need to be ready. There's no clock that says when something is going to happen. So I was sitting at brunch and I got an alert through Data Miner on my phone, which is a data aggregator, and it said these chemical weapons were just used in Syria. And in less than a week, we were conducting those strikes. So to me, it was quickly, I needed to get my team together. We needed to understand what was going on. We needed to talk with our sister fleet in the Middle East out of Bahrain and understand what they were doing. And so we quickly got together and started just brainstorming about what were some of the options. Should we be asked for options? So again, you always need to be ready. I think the second big takeaway is that you need to train like you will fight. And that's going to be jointly with allies and partners of some sort in most cases. And so, in the U.S., we do a regular drumbeat of exercises. We're always kind of ready to go, at the ready. But what I found was, as much as we had practiced that, we hadn't really thought about how we would integrate allies and partners into a multi-domain, multi-axis strike and across two fleets. So what I learned was, I couldn't really speak with some of my French or UK counterparts on the drop of a hat. We needed to make sure that we had all of our communication systems ready to go. We can do that at sea, but our headquarters were not necessarily connected. So if you looked at my office on, the day one of getting ready to afterwards, I had a whole new set of communications gear and VTCs and the ability to really have real live conversations with everybody I needed to talk to. And I think making sure that you can integrate them fully into all the battle rhythm discussions, because again, each nation is bringing its own sovereign capability, and you want to be able to integrate it to the best of its ability. I think the third thing is, again, learning about yourself as a leader. But the most important thing is you need to remain calm under pressure, because something will go wrong. And in the course of these events, many things were going wrong, invariably going wrong. And you would be called down to go and get briefed on whatever the situation was, and be presented with all the facts. And then there's about 20 pairs of eyes staring at you, waiting for you to make this decision. And making that decision calmly, collectedly, it does really set the tone for your whole team. And then you move forward with the action. Everything works out just fine. But if I didn't set that tone, you could see where panic could creep into your team. So having that calm demeanor, regardless of what you feel like inside, it's really important for you as a leader.
Sounds like a tough context in which to make a high stakes decision, dealing with kind of the immediate acute operational problems in front of you, but also having to deal with the macro kind of geopolitical and policy context in which that's happening. Another big question for you. What was the toughest decision that you think you had to make during your time as CNO?
Yep. As the CNO, you're the man, train, equip person for the Navy. And, you're always making very hard decisions about the budget, I would have to say. There are never enough resources to go around. It's the iron triangle of painful choices. You want to buy new things. You want to modernize old things. You want to pay for your people and everything that's associated with that.
Shout out Cap Hicks.
Yes, those can be very difficult choices. But I would have to say the toughest decisions were really about the people in the end. because you are selecting flag officers, you're selecting senior enlisted, you're selecting people that are going to go on and have very consequential decisions. You have to think about their individual skill sets, their personality, how they're going to match into the job that is available for them. And then you have the great joy of telling the person who's been selected that they're going to move on to this next job. And you also have the great sadness of telling someone that their time in the Navy has come to an end and thanking them for everything that they've done. So it's really the personnel decisions that I think were the hardest for me, because it's very personal. You've invested in all of these people and training them over many, many years. Of course, I knew them all, and it made it a little bit hard to make those decisions sometimes.
Yeah, the human side of it all. I mean, zooming somewhat back out again, you did a nice job of summarizing how the global security environment's changed over the 40 years of your service. What would you say are the biggest security challenges and threats facing the US in the near and the medium term?
Yeah, I think my view on this is really that the PRC is really the biggest challenge to us and actually to many other nations around the world. I feel like they are the only nation with the capability and the intent to sort of rewrite the rules-based international order to an order which will suit them better than suits everyone else. It's an order that's supported prosperity and security for the last 80 years, and I really feel that it's under threat, and just as the U.S. is under threat. The PRC has a massive civ-mill industrial base. It's got a lot of dual-use ports. It's got dual-use scientific facilities all around the world. They are incredible shipbuilders. They've built an amazing amount of different weapon systems that are actually directly targeted at U.S. strengths. And I think if you look around some of their actions, they're really being bullies to a lot of people in the Indo-Pacific region. And I think this is a concern for the United States, and I think it's really a concern for everyone. Even stepping back into broader domains, their efforts in space, in cyber, and their expansion of their nuclear weapon capabilities, these are things I think that not only the U.S. need to worry about, but we need to worry about as well. I think looking a little bit closer to home, I would also highlight a couple challenges. One that's more broadly, and I think a lot of nations are struggling with this, is the defense industrial base. That's very important to everyone who's trying to build new capabilities, whether they're new robotic autonomous systems and learning how to integrate them, whether we're building ships, submarines, setting up supply chains for success. I think this is an area where many nations are focused on really kind of returning to that manufacturing system for the defense industrial base, but also working to envision what does the new future of work look like? And then what are we doing in high schools, in colleges, and how are we preparing people to be able to be effective in that new workforce? And then what does that bridging plan look like as we transition from the current state of the industrial base to what the future industrial base can offer for us? And I think the third thing I would highlight again back at home really is what is the state of the workforce? And that kind of speaks to the last part I was talking about in the industrial base. And, in the U.S., I think I always talk about it as a national call to service. It doesn't mean that you need to serve in the military, but there are a lot of other ways to serve your nation, whether you're an electrician, a welder, a weapons builder. There's a lot of ways you can contribute to national security. And how do we inspire people to be part of that defense ecosystem that I think is so important for us?
Yeah, and it's not just the ability to build weapons, right? It's also the ability to maintain them through the entire life cycle. I know the readiness metric was a key point of interest for you during your time in service. Would you like to speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to get new players on the field or more players on the field. You can certainly get new platforms on the field, but you can also maintain the ones you have and keep their readiness up and making sure that they're always ready to go. That's another really important way to be able to sustain your Navy and make sure that it's always available.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any specific changes that you think required, either in the US system or the way that the US does foreign policy to address the challenges you've just laid out, whether it's with respect to China or respect to the industrial base?
Yeah, I think one of the important things for, every nation as they're deciding what their strategy is going to be is to really demonstrate strategic discipline in whatever it is. What I've seen over time is that nations will set priorities and then they will get distracted by something. And that whatever that distraction is ends up consuming a lot of readiness. It consumes a lot of time and energy, while the other challenge is actually getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you take, in my case again, the PRC, we really need to focus on the PRC, what it will take to deter the PRC, what it would take to defeat the PRC. These are things that we really need to be focusing on. And I think there are other challenges and threats that we need to be prepared to address, but this is the biggest one. And I think whatever we do to prepare for that will be able to support us in getting after any of the other challenges. I think the other two, I would say, the first one is acquisition reform. It's very difficult and laborious, and it takes a long time to procure different platforms, weapon systems, and things like that. It's difficult to integrate or have co-development with allies and partners. And so how can we have acquisition reform that speeds things up, still maintains a high level of quality of what we need to get, creates a fair price for the government and also for the industry. But these are some things that I think that we really need to do. We need to take a hard look at all of the technical warrant holders, make sure that we're enforcing standards for a reason, and really accelerate our ability to produce, deliver all of the systems that we need. And then the last one is going back to the must speed up category. We are really working hard on robotic and autonomous systems, drones, integrating them into our everyday life. And I think we really have to do that faster. And that would require a new mindset. Not everything is going to work. We need to buy a bunch of different things. We need to make sure that we're able to sustain them with maintenance, with sustainment, with their parts, where they're going to be berthed, who's going to operate them, and do all that kind of training, but have the ability to know that some of these are going to fail. So try them out, see what works. And then just like adversaries, they're going to basically need a conveyor belt of capabilities. We need a conveyor belt of capabilities too. So how are we going to change those over time, whether they're software-based so we can use old hardware and platforms to be able to modify their ability just by changing their software? That will make everything happen much more quickly and much more effectively and make changes to combat anything that an adversary might be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe also worth pointing out that there is a kind of a direct link between acquisition reform and getting those very advanced capabilities into service faster, partially because so many of them reside outside of the traditional defense industrial base ecosystem. And the challenge of bringing in the commercial workforce, not the place to go into detail about that, but it's certainly kind of a prominent problem for the Pentagon to be thinking through right now.
Yeah, I think you have the traditional defense industrial base, but then I like to call it the innovation base.
Yeah.
And as I went around and would meet with different companies, whether they're small startups or a little bit more established tech firms, they're very patriotic people who really want to support the nation's defense. Sometimes it's just a matter of connecting them. They just don't necessarily know how to navigate our defense system. And you just need a little bit of a translator in there, whether it was through Replicator or through DIU. A lot of the different programs that we had put in place are really starting to scale those engagements. And I think they hold a lot of promise for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you think the introduction of these sorts of technologies, AI, autonomous systems, hypersonics, et cetera, how do you think they're going to change the nature of warfare? I know that's a very big question. If you want to pick one or two of those things and go down a rabbit hole, then that's fine. But yeah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the way that I looked at these new technologies is that the first part is to figure out how they can complement existing technology in different existing capabilities and platforms. I like to think of them as things that can expand the reach and the lethality of our conventionally manned platforms. It's really important, I think, to be able to integrate those platforms. I don't think it's enough to just completely make a switch right now to just only use unmanned platforms. We really need to integrate them and figure out how to extend this reach. I think the other thing unmanned or robotic and autonomous systems can do is they do the things that are dirty, dangerous, or dull. And if we can have unmanned systems doing those things, then we can free up our people to do the things that we really need their brain power for. I think, they're here to stay. We saw them in Armenia and Azerbaijan. You had one adapter and one non-adapter, and certainly the country with the new technology did better. You're seeing this in Ukraine. Of course, you see what I've seen from the maritime perspective is basically a strong use of unmanned and different technologies by the Ukrainian Navy to be able to bottle up the Russian Navy over in just one corner of the Black Sea and sort of rendering it less effective. And you're seeing it in the Middle East, again, with the drones. We saw it in the Red Sea with our own ships being deployed there with the Houthis, rendering about 100, at least 90 attacks when I was still there. All of them defeated, of course. So really what that tells you is you need to have the technology and you need to be able to defend against the technology. And being able to iterate inside the adversary's to-do loop to counter their new technologies is really going to be important. So I think the character of war is definitely changing. Robotic and autonomous systems are here to stay. There's a lot of benefits to them, but everyone always needs to remember that unmanned is not no manning. It still takes a lot of people to operate and maintain these things. So it's not really a silver bullet to just take away challenges from manpower or workforce shortages. It's just a different way of thinking about them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think on the AI front, you also mentioned, it has a real promise of speeding up decision-making and making our decisions more data-based, I guess is a way that you could say that. So I think that, again, has a real promise.
It's easy for kind of policy wonks like myself who get to sit in think tanks all day and think about this stuff to say that you operators out there should just simply adopt all these new technologies and make do. I'm wondering if you have any examples of where you were, as an operator, having to take on these new technologies and having to adapt to that in real time.
Well, I would say back to this Maya Houthi example, obviously we saw that the Houthis were getting increasingly advanced technology. And the important thing to me is the CNO, not in charge of operations, but in charge of the platforms and the people and everything related to them to support them, was to make sure that we could get them the best tactics, techniques, and procedures to be able to defeat any of these advances. And so it was really a 10-year investment in our warfare centers that enabled us to connect the tacticians with the industry people, with the engineers who could take the data from our ships and what they were seeing and basically take it back, look at all of it, and then deliver to them some new either techniques and procedures or perhaps software updates that would help them stay ahead of what the Houthis were up to. So that's one example of how, we had to adapt our systems. You say that you're here thinking about, things in a think tank all day. Well, a lot of our engineers are not on duty 24/7. But in this case, we had to really change the mindset where, all right, we have forces in contact with an adversary, a very potent adversary. And now we all need to be on watch, ready to respond and support however quickly they needed to do that. I think another one, which maybe seem a little bit more academic, but as the CNO, I also developed a dashboard. So these are very common out in the industry. I'd been out touring a bunch of different facilities, and I was like, oh, I want a dashboard too. I want to have my single authoritative database. I wanted to be able to suck up all these metrics. So I picked 10 metrics that were important to me and things that I wanted to be able to visualize through daily visual management. I would know if we're making progress in this or what our trend lines were. And so I had my dashboard. And interestingly enough, once the CNO gets a dashboard, a lot of other people want dashboards. And so what I found that was basically it really encouraged the use of data to underwrite some of the thought processes and the decisions that we were making. And I think it's really something that was easy thanks to AI. Before that, we might have 17 different streams of data on the same thing, but you can use AI to pull it all together and again, make it your single authoritative database. So I think that was a good way to do that.
Yeah, amazing. My last question for you before we go to the behind the numbers segment. What piece or pieces of advice would you give to people considering serving in the Navy today?
Well, I would say go for it. The Navy is I don't want to sound too parochial, but I will. The Navy is the best service. We operate from seabed to space and everywhere in between, all around the world. You get to employ the most amazing technology, and you get to work with the best people, and you get to work with allies and partners all over the world. And it is really exciting. For those that are in the Navy already, just remember it goes by way too fast. Enjoy every minute of it. And I'll leave you with my one favorite quote from Admiral Nimitz, and I'll just paraphrase here, but it's learn all you can, do your best, and don't worry about what you can't control. Always have a positive attitude and enjoy it. Being positive is super contagious. So go about every day and enjoy it.
And that's great life advice generally, not just for the Navy. So I'll foot stomp that for sure. Thanks a lot for sharing all your reflections on everything I've asked you. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, and you've done an admirable job of covering my scattergun approach to this. I'm keen to hear your by the numbers stat now, actually. So what have you chosen for us?
Okay, I'm going to give you two.
Great.
Okay, one, as I was the CNO in my navigation plan, I picked 1 January 2027 as a very important date by which we needed to be more ready than the PRC for anything that the PRC wanted to do. So as of 17 November, as we're recording this, there are 410 days until 1 January 2027. And when I started tracking it, there were over 1,000. And by the numbers, I think this one affects Australia just as much as it affects the US, is that 90% of global trade travels by the sea. So never underestimate the importance of your Navy.
Yeah, excellent advice, especially in the context for Australia right now, not just with AUKUS, but with major surface combatant recapitalization going on. Lisa, this has been excellent. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and for sharing your insights with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
And thank you all for listening to the podcast. As we wrap up, I'd like to point out a couple of other podcasts that might be of interest to you. Our CEO, Dr. Mike Green, is co-host of the Asia Chessboard. I'd also recommend checking out the USSC live podcast series that runs recordings from our major live events, including our recent Sydney International Strategy Forum. You can find these on our website, ussc.edu.au, or wherever you get your podcasts.